My name is Nora Callahan. I am 34 years old, and I'm holding a field notebook right now, 4 inches by 6 inches, dark green cover, waterproof right in the rain paper, 72 pages used, the rest blank. The spiral binding bent slightly inward, from where it spent 11 months pressed against my left hip inside a cargo pocket. Because this notebook contains the original structural failure calculations that saved a foreign embassy compound, 219 American lives, and a classified military installation I still cannot name. And because my husband told everyone he wrote it, the cover is so soft now. When I run my thumb across it, there's a groove worn into the cardboard where the pen clip sat for months. Page 1 has a date stamped in the upper right corner. September 14th, and a soil composition reading I jotted at 0547, while standing in 4 inches of standing water underneath a concrete retaining wall, in a country I had entered under a name that was not mine. The ink bled slightly on that first entry. I remember thinking the humidity would ruin the pages before I finished the assessment. It didn't. The pages survived everything. The marriage didn't. I noticed the binding damage before I noticed anything else when it came back to me. The spiral was torqued counterclockwise. Someone had photocopied it face down on a flatbed scanner, pressing too hard on the left side. I know this because I have examined over 400 structural documents for signs of reproduction distortion. That skill had caught fabricated inspection reports on 3 continents for the Army Corps of Engineers. It was about to catch my husband stealing my career. I held the notebook under the kitchen light and didn't move for what felt like several minutes. The binding told me everything. Someone had copied these pages, and they had done it recently. The torque was fresh, the metal still slightly warm, to the touch, from being bent back into shape. I stood there pressing my thumbnail into the spiral until the ridges left a white line across my skin. I was already counting. How many pages? How many calculations? How many of them had my handwriting, and how many had been retyped? Before I tell you what I did the night I decided to open it, where are you right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to know where this reaches. My name, again, is Nora Callahan. I'm a structural forensic engineer. I hold a commission as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Corps of Engineers, though for most of my career, the people who benefited from my work never knew my name or my rank. What I do, what I have always done, is assess whether structures will hold or fail. Bridges, dams, retaining walls, embassy perimeters, underground bunkers, temporary shelters built for displaced persons in regions where the ground shifts 6 inches per season. I measure cracks. I calculate load tolerances. I write reports that determine whether people live inside a building or evacuate it within 72 hours. My hands know the texture of compromised concrete before my instruments confirm it. I can feel calciumite deposits through nitrile gloves. I can smellite calciumite deposits through nitrile gloves. I can smell chloride corrosion in rebar from across a basement. These are not metaphors. These are the physical consequences of spending 12 years pressing my body against failing structures so that other people don't have to. I married Colonel David Callahan when I was 24. He was an infantry officer, 3rd-generation Army, square jaw, firm handshake, the kind of man who walked into a room and made it feel like he had already been in charge of it for years. He was charming, he was confident, and for the first 3 years, he was proud of me. That changed when his promotion slowed and mine didn't. David was a capable officer, competent, respected within his command, but the Army is a pyramid, and the higher you climb, the fewer positions exist. He was passed over for battalion command the first time, then the second. Both times, he handled it publicly with grace. Privately, the silence in our house lasted weeks. Meanwhile, I was pulled into a classified assessment program that reported directly to the Deputy Chief of Engineers. I could not tell David what I was doing. I could not tell him where I was going. I could not explain why I left for 9 days and came back with a bruise on my shoulder from crawling through a collapsed drainage tunnel in body armor. All I could say was, "It's field work," and all he heard was, "It's not important." "Nora inspects walls," he told his mother once, at Thanksgiving dinner, while she carved the turkey. "She's basically a very expensive building inspector." His brother laughed. His mother smiled politely. I cut my green beans into smaller pieces and said nothing. Snorts. The irony is that I spent my professional life identifying the exact point where a structure begins to fail, the hairline fracture that precedes the collapse. And I lived inside my own marriage for 11 years, without once putting my hand against the wall. David never hit me. He never raised his voice. What he did was simpler and more corrosive. He reduced me. In every room, at every event, in every introduction, he made me slightly smaller than I was. Not enough to notice if you weren't paying attention. Just enough that over time, the people around us stopped asking me questions and started asking him. At a battalion Christmas party, a young captain asked what I did. David stepped in before I could open my mouth. "She looks at cracks in concrete." Riveting stuff. The captain nodded and changed the subject. I held my wine glass by the stem and watched the surface of the Merlot vibrate from the base of the speaker system across the room. That micro-tremor in liquid. I use it in the field to detect subsurface instability. I was using it now to keep myself from speaking. The sacrifices accumulated quietly. I turned down a teaching fellowship at the engineer school because David said the timing conflicted with his change of command ceremony. "She's funding the venue deposit." I postponed my professional engineer license renewal because he needed me to manage our move to Fort Belvoir while he attended a leadership course in Leavenworth. I declined a position on the Dam Safety Review Board because he said it would mean too many weeks apart and people would talk. Each time, the demand arrived wrapped in reasonableness. Each time, I agreed because the cost of refusing felt higher than the cost of postponing. That's how it works. Not a single catastrophic demand. A series of small ones that accumulate until the structure you built around yourself no longer bears its own weight. The notebook came back to me on a Tuesday. I had been looking for it for 3 months. The last time I'd seen it, it was in my field bag, inside a locked cabinet in our shared home office. David had a key because the cabinet also held our tax documents and insurance files. I hadn't thought anything of it. The notebook contained my field calculations for Operation Bedrock, a classified structural assessment of Allied military installations across 2 countries. Everything in it was my handwriting, my measurements, my conclusions. The official digital reports had been filed through secure channels. The notebook was my personal working copy, the original scratch work behind the final product. When I couldn't find it, I assumed I'd left it at the office. Then I found it in David's briefcase. He'd left the briefcase open on the dining room table, uncharacteristically careless. I was looking for a pen. Instead, I found 72 pages of my own handwriting inside his leather case, tucked between a promotion board packet and a folder labeled Professional Development Portfolio. I picked it up. I turned to the first page. September 14th, my date stamp, my soil reading, my handwriting. Then I turned to the last used page and saw something that made my chest tighten. Someone had written a single line at the bottom in blue ink. Not my ink, not my hand. It read, Original Field Assessment, D. Callahan, Lead Engineer. I stood in the dining room holding the notebook for a long time. The light from the overhead fixture was the same warm yellow it always was. The table was the same walnut surface where we ate dinner every night. Nothing in the room had changed. but something in me became perfectly still. I was running calculations I hadn't asked myself to run, not about concrete or rebar, about dates, about timelines, about every professional recognition David had received in the past 18 months, and whether the timing matched my deployments. The first thing I did was photograph every page, both sides. I used a color-calibrated light source and a metric ruler along the edge for scale. The same protocol I use when documenting structural damage in the field. 61 photographs. Timestamped, geotagged to our home address. Then I examined the notebook's binding under magnification. The counterclockwise torque was consistent with a flatbed copier. Not a handheld scanner, not a phone camera. Someone had physically pressed this notebook open against glass. I checked our home printer. It had a flatbed function. I opened the scan history. 47 scans completed on March 3rd, between 22:14 and 2308 hours. I was in Wiesbaden that week. That was layer 1. The obvious insult. My husband had copied my classified field notes while I was deployed. Layer 2 took longer to find. I requested my own personnel file through official channels, a routine action any officer can take. What came back was mostly expected. Service record, evaluations, awards, assignment history. But inside the professional development section, I found a document I had never seen. A memorandum recommending David for an accelerated promotion to full colonel, citing his direct leadership of structural assessment operations in support of Allied force protection. The memorandum was dated April 12th, 5 weeks after the scan history on our printer. The recommending officer was a brigadier general I had briefed personally during Operation Bedrock. I had stood in that general's office and walked him through my findings page by page. David had never been in that room. David had never been in that country during the operational window. I pulled the metadata on the digital version of the memorandum. The author field read, D. Callahan. The file creation date was April 9th, 3 days before it was officially submitted. The document template matched the one stored on our shared home computer. David had written his own recommendation memo, attributed my work to himself, and submitted it through a channel that made it appear to originate from his command section. That was layer 2. The hidden setup. This was not carelessness. It was architecture. LAPE 3 surfaced when I searched further back. I pulled every performance evaluation David had received since our marriage. In his 2019 evaluation, his rater noted exceptional contributions to infrastructure assessment during overseas operations. In 2020, a similar note demonstrated superior technical understanding of structural engineering principles in support of force protection. In 2021, spearheaded critical dam safety analysis for Allied installations. Every one of those citations described my work, not his. My deployments, my reports, my calculations, some of them made in this notebook I was holding. David had been harvesting my classified work for 5 years. Because it was classified, I couldn't publicly claim it. Because I couldn't publicly claim it, he could quietly absorb it. He had been building his career on the back of mine, one evaluation cycle at a time. That was layer 3. The older pattern. I was not discovering a single theft. I was mapping a system. Layer 4 arrived in a document I almost didn't open. Inside David's promotion packet, the one I found in the briefcase next to my notebook. There was a financial ledger, a consulting agreement between David and a private defense contractor, executed the previous January. The agreement paid David $42,000 annually as a technical infrastructure advisor. The scope of work described in the contract was, almost verbatim, the scope of work from my classified assessment reports. He had monetized my findings, not once. On a recurring basis, $42,000 a year for expertise he did not possess. derived from documents he did not write, based on fieldwork he did not perform. I set the notebook on the table. The same yellow light. I looked at the binding, that bent spiral, that counterclockwise torque, and I understood that this small green notebook was not just evidence of plagiarism. It was evidence of fraud. I spent the next 3 weeks building a file. I obtained certified copies of my original classified reports through proper channels, with appropriate redactions. I retrieved the printer scan logs and exported them to an external drive. I documented the metadata discrepancies between David's submitted documents and the original file properties. I contacted the Defense Finance and Accounting Service to verify whether David had disclosed outside consulting income on his financial disclosure forms. He had not. I also called the Brigadier General, not to accuse, to ask a question. Sir, I wanted to confirm, did you author or approve a memorandum recommending Colonel Callahan for accelerated promotion based on Operation Bedrock assessments? There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough for me to hear him set down his coffee cup. I did not, he said. That's what I needed to know, sir. I also retrieved archived email correspondence from the secure server. 14 emails from David to the defense contractor, sent from his personal account, attaching technical summaries that matched, paragraph for paragraph, sections of my classified reports, rewritten just enough to remove classification markings, not enough to remove my analysis, my methodology, my conclusions, my numbers. David's unit was hosting his promotion reception on a Saturday evening in the Officers Club at Fort Belvoir. The building he had spent months renovating through his connections with Post Command. He had chosen the paint colors. He had selected the caterer. He had approved the guest list personally. Every detail in that room reflected his taste, his rank, his certainty that this was his night. 200 guests filled the main hall. Polished wood floors, brass wall sconces. A portrait of David in dress blues hung near the entrance. He'd had it commissioned the month prior. The bar served his preferred bourbon. The playlist was his. I arrived on time. I wore my Class A uniform, which I rarely did at social events. David noticed immediately. "You didn't need to dress up," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "It's not that kind of evening." "I wanted to," I said. He smiled, the smile he used when he believed he was being generous by not questioning further. The evening moved through its expected phases. Toasts. Laughter. David's commanding officer praised his technical vision. A colleague called him the most versatile engineer in the Corps. David stood at the center of the room, like a man standing in a monument he had built. I waited until the third toast was finished. Then I walked to the front of the room with my notebook in my left hand and a manila folder in my right. "If I may," I said. David's smile flickered. "Nora, this isn't. I'd like to say something about my husband's career." The room quieted. David's commanding officer nodded. "Of course." I opened the manila folder. David's promotion packet cites his leadership during Operation Bedrock. I held up the first document. This is the original field assessment for that operation. My name is on every page. My handwriting. My calculations. My signature block. David stepped forward. "Nora, let's not do this here." I placed the notebook on the table in front of him. He looked at it and went pale. He recognized it. That's a working document," he said. "It was a collaborative effort. Your printer scanned this notebook 47 times on March while I was in Germany. The metadata on the resulting files lists you as the author." His commanding officer stood. "Colonel Callahan, is this accurate?" "She's taking this out of context. We worked together on several." "We have never shared a single assignment," I said. "Our security clearances are at different levels." I verified this with personnel records. David turned to the room. "She's been under a lot of stress. This is a personal matter, and I'd appreciate if Defense Finance and Accounting Service confirmed you did not disclose $42,000 in annual consulting income derived from classified technical summaries you did not author. The room had become so quiet I could hear the ice settling in someone's glass. "This is my wife," David said, his voice shifting to something thin and controlled. "She's always been. She's competitive. She has been since the academy. This is not what it looks like." That was 3. Denial, image management, credibility attack. Then the door at the back of the room opened. Brigadier General Martin Hargrove, retired, walked in wearing a dark suit. I had not invited him. I had only asked him a question on the phone 3 weeks earlier. He had done his own research. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, "but I believe my name was used on a promotion memorandum I did not write." He looked at David. "I'd like that corrected tonight." David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I looked at my husband across the table where my notebook sat between us. The same notebook that held my soil readings, my crack measurements, my load calculations, my hours of fieldwork in body armor in the dark, and I said the only thing left to say. David doesn't steal because he can't do the work. He steals because he decided my work was his to take. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. David's executive officer, Major Karen Liang, had been standing near the bar through the entire exchange. She was the first person to move. She set her glass down and walked to the back of the room and stood next to General Hargrove. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. 3 days later, she submitted a written statement to the Inspector General confirming she had witnessed David attach technical documents to emails that she knew from coordination meetings had originated from my reports. She had noticed the discrepancies months earlier. She had told herself it wasn't her place. Standing in that room, watching David try to explain away the notebook, she realized that her silence had been its own kind of signature on his fraud. When she called me afterward, her voice was steady but raw. I should have said something sooner. I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't. But I told her that what she did in that room, walking across the floor and standing on the other side, mattered. She nodded on the other end of the line. It doesn't fix anything. No, but it changes what happens next. The Inspector General's office opened a formal investigation the following Monday. David was suspended from command within 72 hours. His security clearance was revoked pending the outcome. The defense contractor terminated the consulting agreement within 2 weeks, citing material misrepresentation of qualifications. Their language, not mine. The $42,000 in undisclosed income triggered a separate inquiry by the Army's Ethics Office. By the end of that month, David's promotion was rescinded. The memorandum bearing General Hargrove's name was Codrum bearing, formally withdrawn and flagged as fraudulent in the personnel system. Every evaluation that cited David's infrastructure work over the past 5 years was placed under review. The portrait he'd commissioned was taken down from the officers' club 3 days after the reception. The nail hole stayed in the wall for weeks. I know because I drove past the building on my way to work, and I noticed it through the window one morning. A small, dark circle on cream-colored paint. A structural void where something used to hang. David moved out of our house in June. He took the briefcase. He did not take the notebook. It was still on the dining room table, where I had placed it during the reception. Someone from his unit had returned it to me in a clear evidence bag. I removed it from the bag, set it on the table, and left it there for 3 days before I picked it up again. Our separation was filed in August. I did not contest anything. I did not ask for anything that was not mine. The Army's Legal Assistance Office handled the paperwork. It was clean, efficient. Like closing out a field report, David pleaded guilty to 3 counts of misrepresentation in official documents. The sentence was a formal reprimand, forfeiture of 6 months' pay, and mandatory retirement at reduced rank. He left the Army as a lieutenant colonel. The rank he had held honestly. Karen Liang was transferred to a new assignment at the Pentagon. We did not become friends. But 6 months later, she sent me a message. I used your methodology to flag a discrepancy in a contractor's structural report. You taught me to look closer. That was enough. General Hargrove wrote a letter to the Chief of Engineers, recommending my work be formally attributed in the declassified summaries. It was approved. For the first time, my name appeared on records that had previously listed no individual author. The corrections were quiet, administrative, no ceremony. Just my name in the right place, on the right documents. The teaching fellowship I had turned down 3 years earlier was offered again the following spring. I accepted. I now teach a course on forensic structural analysis at the Army Engineer School. The same school where I sat in the back row as a lieutenant, filling my first green notebook with soil composition readings and crack propagation formulas. My students are young. Most of them do not know my operational history. That is fine. I write the same sentence on the board the first day of every semester. The structure tells you the truth. Your job is to listen. Last Tuesday evening, I sat at my desk in the small office they gave me on the 2nd floor of the engineering building. The window was open. September air, still warm but turning. I was grading field reports. My students had completed their first independent assessment of a decommissioned concrete bridge on post. Most of their notebooks were standard issue, black covers, spiral bindings, metric rulers tucked inside. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my notebook. The green one. 72 pages used. The binding still bent slightly inward. I opened it to the first page. September 14th. My soil reading, my handwriting. The ink still bled slightly where the humidity had touched it years ago. I set it on my desk, next to the stack of student reports. Then I picked up my pen and opened a new notebook. Same brand, same waterproof pages, same spiral binding, and wrote the date in the upper right corner. The ink was clean, the page was dry, the binding was straight. I didn't think about David. I thought about the bridge my students would assess next week, the eastern abutment, and whether the eastern abutment showed the sulfate deposits I suspected from the soil samples. Some people believe that consequences are the same thing as revenge. That exposing someone's fraud is an act of aggression rather than an act of correction. I understand why they believe that. It is easier to frame accountability as cruelty than to examine why the accountability was necessary. But I have spent my career studying what happens when damage goes unrepaired. A crack in a retaining wall does not heal itself. It does not close because the people inside the building prefer not to think about it. It widens. It deepens. It follows the path of least resistance until the wall does what physics always intended it to do. Silence is not neutrality. Silence is the path of least resistance, and the people who maintain it are not protecting the structure. They are protecting their comfort inside a building that is already failing. What David did was not complicated. He saw something that worked and decided it belonged to him because claiming it was easier than building it. The fraud was not sophisticated. The system that enabled it was. Every person who repeated his citations without checking, every evaluator who praised his technical vision without asking where it came from, every colleague who assumed the woman standing beside him was the supporting character in his story. They were load-bearing walls in a structure built on someone else's foundation. They did not mean harm, but they carried it.